So what's a typical profile of someone who comes into Entrepreneur First?
Yeah, so people are typically leaving a first or a second job in their career to come and do this, or maybe leaving academia after a PhD or a postdoc. So I think the youngest person we ever funded was 18 and the oldest was 67, but the vast majority are probably between 25 and 33, something like that. Over 80% of people we work with have a technical background. And that's part of the thesis in two ways. One part of the thesis is that outside Silicon Valley, technical people are still undervalued in general. The number of times early on that we described this to people and they said, yeah, you just need to get a lot of MBAs in to run the businesses for them. And, I think that's an attitude you never hear in Silicon Valley, but it's still common elsewhere. Although I have to say, I think that has disappeared a lot in London.
Well, there used to be a joke a few years ago that when the so-called acqui-hire was a major exit path for startups, that is a larger company acquiring the talent, the company was worth $1 million for every engineer it had, software engineer, and minus $500,000 for every MBA it had on staff.
Right. And I think that's a piece of Valley culture that took a while to diffuse.
What about the gender split of the founders that you bring into the program and you back?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely like most people in tech, that's not where we would want it to be. I think we run at about 20% women in the program, which is definitely much lower than we would like. It's definitely improving over time, but again, probably more slowly than we'd have expected and hoped. We do have a spin-out not-for-profit called Code First, which tries to deal with some of the pipeline issues here. We teach young women how to program free of charge while they're at university. But, I think it's still going to be a very long game before we get there. But, we're definitely creating some amazing female role models who I think hopefully will have be a big inspiration to people coming down the line.
What about racial diversity?
We're global, and so we're extremely diverse, both as a pool, but also within each office. I mean, obviously it varies from place to place. Obviously in India, we're close to 100% Indian, but that's probably the only office we have that there's not a lot of diversity on the on nationality and ethnicity.
Fascinating. How about the raw numbers? I mean, how many companies have you created through these programs? What have they gone on to do, and how much additional capital have you attracted over the last decade?
Yeah, so I think we're running now at something like 250 companies that have gone on to raise seed or beyond. So the first round of financing after EF or beyond. I think between them, the enterprise value of well north of 2 billion now, raising well over $500 million of capital between them. We iterated our own model a lot. It took us sort of 3 goes to find what we do now. So we date our sort of oldest companies in the portfolio to the third cohort, which is now about 5 years old. And that's that cohort looks, if that's a sign of things to come, then I think we'll do very well. That cohort, I think we graduated 14 companies, 9 raised seed, 6 raised a further round A or beyond. 1 exit, 9-figure exit, 2 Series Bs and 1 Series C in that group. So it's starting to look pretty good.
It's a patient game building an overnight technology success. I think a lot of
exactly
people have learned that one. Earlier, you said that there was a general view that there's a small corner in the world where the default position is to go off and express your ambition and creativity by creating a company. That is Silicon Valley, and Entrepreneur First has positioned itself to do things in a somewhat different way and learn from the Valley in some ways and innovate in others. You attracted quite a lot of what can only be described as sort of blue chip Silicon Valley royalty in terms of both investors and advisors and board members. I'm thinking of my friend Reid Hoffman, who founded LinkedIn, has been a previous guest on this podcast, and Peter Thiel, the well-known investor. What would you say has been the biggest influence they have had on the development of EF?
I think what it's really helped us with is thinking about at what level of geography does each stage of our funnel need to operate. So I think one of Entrepreneur First's strengths is that it can reach talent pools in places that Silicon Valley generally does not. And as a result, that means that we hopefully can surface fantastic talent that's undervalued. one of my beliefs that I share with Reed and have been very influenced in by him is thinking about where can the Valley play a role and be helpful. And I think the answer is that it remains the case that scaling capital, and in particular scaling expertise, is still very concentrated in Silicon Valley. And so increasingly, I think one of the ways we think about EF is as a platform that allows talented people to sort of transcend geography, or maybe more prosaically, to sort of remove the ceiling that geography places on their ambitions. We're not anti-Silicon Valley, but we think that we can be additive to Silicon Valley by just pulling in from a much more global range of talent pools.
One of the things that sort of I would observe since you've started, Entrepreneur First, and I've been following this industry since 1994 and participating in it, is that even as we get more and more successes, large companies in being founded in Europe, for example, Spotify or Klarna or Skype or Oak North, their relative size to the very largest companies that get founded out of the Silicon Valley tech hub remains rather small. So the very biggest European companies, let's put SAP on the side for the moment, but Spotify, by its market capitalization, is less than a tenth of the size of the very big US companies. And it still seems to be the case that Silicon Valley, not just for its scaling capital, but actually its general scaling capacity of talent and access to customers, is still an essential component if you want to build a really, really big company. And we don't seem to have a path that is as well trodden to building the $10 billion or $100 billion company coming out of any Western region other than the Bay Area.
I think that's certainly a fair assessment of the history and probably of the present. I mean, I personally, I'm not a nationalist about any of this. I don't particularly mind where these companies are built, although I think there's definitely interesting follow-on questions from that, such as whether they pay tax, but maybe we don't want to get into that right now. But, I would say two things about that. One, I think there is now increasing evidence that Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, is hitting diseconomies of scale as a cluster. And I think that's or rather the consequences of that are being accelerated by the current pandemic, in that, I think remote becomes more of an option. I think the second thing is that, exactly as you said, one of the reasons that Silicon Valley has been so successful in taking companies from being worth $1 billion to being worth 10 to being worth 100 is that actually there's a very limited pool of executive talent for scaling software companies, and they've largely been in the Valley. If I was to give a sort of take on why you should be bullish on Europe now, I would say that when I look at some of the deeper tech things that we fund, and I know that you see as well in your sort of with your venture hat on, a lot of those companies, things that are, say, at the intersection of machine learning and biology or machine learning and materials, it's much less clear what the exec team for those kinds of businesses is at scale. And as a result, it's much less obvious that Silicon Valley has a near monopoly on that talent. It might actually be that Europe has some real strength there. Kind of farmer execs who have itchy feet might be the right people to go in and run or help run one of those companies. And so I wonder whether, as software eats the world, paradoxically, that actually makes software scaling talent less the limiting factor as these companies scale.